So I'm a medium. I don't know how much you know about me, but I am a psychic medium, which means I can see, speak, and hear the dead. If that's something that people choose to believe in, I'm not here to shove it down anyone's throat. But I kind of am hearing a little bit like you always have weird stuff happen to you, even since you were a kid.
Absolutely. And I honestly attribute it to like paying attention because it got my attention at such a young age. I'm like, oh, I should continue to pay attention. But maybe it's more along the lines of what you're saying.
I wonder how many identical twins have actually experienced things because I know her and I have experienced the same dreams, but it's like, what's the differentiate? Oh, we had a dream instead of a UFO, but it's like how they explained the way that the aliens looked to them is exactly how they looked to me.
Welcome, curious minds, to a brand new episode of Flying Chariots, The Rise. Today's fabulous guest is Nomar Slevik, an independent creator, writer, researcher in numerous aspects of the paranormal. That's awesome. Nomar shares his experiences through books, podcasts, and also documentaries. His interest in all these mysterious things was triggered already at the tender age of 4, if I remember right, when he had a UFO encounter. So yeah, let's jump right in. Nomar, thank you for being our guest tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So before we talk about your books, please, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got drawn into the world of confusion.
Yeah, confusing is definitely the right word. I would, like you said, I was 4 years old, so good memory. And I had fallen asleep, and something woke me up in the middle of the night. And, being 4 years old, I don't know what the middle of the night was. I don't know if it was like 9 p.m. or like 3 a.m., but this loud noise woke me up. And I was kind of looking around for an explanation. And I started hearing these taps on the glass of my bedroom window. And so I looked over there and I saw the sky lighting up, and I was like, oh, it's a thunder and lightning storm. That's cool. So I kneeled up and was like watching the storm outside my window. And I lived in Fort Kent, Maine at the time. And I lived right on the St. John River, and the river was just raging like below me. And after a moment, I saw this really absurd lightning bolt. And like if I were to ask you to draw a lightning bolt, you would draw that jagged yellow line, kind of looks like the charging indicator on your smartphone. And it was stuck in a cloud. That's the only way my young mind could, I guess, process it. And that's like how I still remember it. So it was this lightning bolt. It was stuck in a cloud. And even then I knew lightning you'd only see for a split second, but this stayed there. And there was electricity coming off of it, and there was booms associated with it, it seemed like. And then I don't really know what happened after that. I kind of fell asleep, and I woke up the next morning and I went to the bathroom. And when I was leaving the bathroom and walking back to my bedroom, I could see out my windows, and the lightning bolt was still there. And I was like, well, at 4 years old, I don't know how much I was like, what the hell is that? Why is that still there? But I just knew that it was weird, and I had to go get my dad. So I went and got him, and I brought him upstairs to look out the window to see this weird lightning bolt, and it was gone. And I thought that was crazy. So I was trying to explain to him about the storm the night before and how this lightning bolt got stuck in the clouds. And it wasn't making any sense to him. And he did like what most adults do to little kids. He was like, yeah, patting me on the head. But I must have been really insistent because he had to like kneel down, put his hands on my shoulders, and be like, buddy, it didn't even rain last night. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I remember being really confused about that. But being 4 years old, something shiny caught my attention, and I kind of forgot about it. A couple weeks later, I'm being woken up again in the middle of the night, but this time it's my dad who's waking me up, and he brings me downstairs, and I see my mom and my sister, and my mom is like shoving my sister into like her snow jacket and all this stuff. And then she comes and puts me in my, winter jacket. And then my dad picks me up. He's like, we got to go outside. You got to see this. So we go outside, and it's freezing in Fort Kent, Maine, and like towards the end of winter. And I have my head buried in his chest because it's just so cold. And he's like, buddy, look up. You got to look up. And so finally I peel my head out of his chest and I look up, and I'm seeing these ribbons of green and red. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. And it was the Northern Lights, or the Aurora Borealis. And it's the only time I've seen it in my life. And those two incidents at such an early age, like, created a core memory for me, I think. And it kind of instilled in me that weird stuff happens in the sky and I should probably pay attention. And so I did. And as I got into my teen years, that's when I started like collecting stories and like asking friends and family, like, hey, have you ever seen a ghost, a Bigfoot, a UFO, blah, 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 and started collecting as many stories as I could. But the encounters at 4 years old were like the catalyst, and it just kept snowballing and snowballing, you know. But long story short, that's the catalyst.
Yeah, it's an awesome story, and it's the first time that I hear a description about a UFO. Yeah, described as a lightning bolt stuck in the clouds. It's awesome. And
Yeah.
I've never heard that before. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Honestly, I haven't heard it either in my travels. And I've interviewed a lot of people. I've read a lot of stories. And I just really think it was how my young mind was perceiving it, because it didn't know what it was looking at. And I don't know if I was looking at some weird plasma ball with electricity coming off of it. My mind was like, oh, this is a thunder and lightning bolt. You know, I don't know how that, why
Yeah.
that, you know, happened in my head, but it's how I still see it too. I can't pull what I was really seeing, you know. And you know, and I fell asleep inexplicably, you know, like while I'm in the middle of like watching this crazy thing. So like, was something done to me? I don't know. I don't feel like I was abducted or anything. But you know, was I given a screen memory? Was I abducted and you know, was made to forget? You know, I have no idea. But that's the you know, consciously, that's what I remember.
Do you differentiate between UFO sightings cases and the paranormal? Because I really do think that the paranormal and the UFO phenomena is connected.
Yeah, what I try to do, and it's hard, but we can all get lost in our own lenses. Meaning, if somebody's a ghost hunter, somebody tells them a strange story, they're going to put a haunting type of spin on it typically. And it's not intentional, I don't believe. I think for some people it probably is, but it's unintentional to be like, oh, I think that's probably a demon or whatever. And, you know, somebody who hears noises in the woods or sees balls of light in the woods might start talking about dogmen or Bigfoot if they are cryptid enthusiasts. And with me being a UFO guy, I hear about lightning balls in the woods. I'm like, oh, is that UFO related? You know, as opposed to a spirit, or opposed to a Sasquatch or something, you know. But when I write and when I interview people and when I take stories in, I try to not look through my lens and look under the umbrella of the paranormal, because I too feel like there's a lot of interconnectedness, and it's probably a lot of the same stuff is happening to people. But you know, one person thinks it's their dead grandmother, another person thinks there's a Sasquatch looking through their window, and another person thinks it's a ET looking through their window, you know. And I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible, while at the same time it's up to the reader or the listener to decide what they choose to believe, you know. Like, it's I try to take myself out of it, I try to take bias out of it, but somebody may listen to it or perceive it through their own lens. And you know, that's all you can do, is try to be as unbiased as possible. Hope that answered your question. But
Yeah, thank you. I saw very confident head nod coming from Luna. What you think, Luna?
Well, so I'm a medium. I don't know how much you know about me, but I am a psychic medium, which means I can see, speak, and hear the dead, if that's something that people choose to believe in. I'm not here to shove it down anyone's throat, but I kind of am hearing a little bit like you always have weird stuff happen to you, even since you were a kid. Like, I almost think that maybe you even have some psychic abilities yourself. I feel like that maybe just the weird stuff has always just been attracted to you, and I feel like you've probably had more experiences throughout your life. So I feel that maybe the paranormal and all of this, it was just like meant to be for you. Because I always tell people the paranormal doesn't really it chooses you, but it's like there's only very few people who continue to go with the paranormal or whatever it may be, because it's like it's a part of you. It's found you. And I just only feel like so many people get it, but I feel like you get it. And that's like what I hear. But I've also had experiences myself where I believe I was visited by aliens when I was a young child as well. And it actually had to do with me looking out the window and seeing stuff too as a kid. So
Cool.
our stories have some similar things, but the alien actually came into my house. So there was a
Dang.
difference, but weird stuff. But have you always had weird things happen to you? Do you always just find weird
Absolutely.
stuff? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I honestly attribute it to like paying attention, because it got my attention at such a young age. I'm like, oh, I should continue to pay attention. But maybe it's more along the lines of what you're saying. It's totally possible. And I've been told by certain people, or different people throughout my life, like, oh, you seem like an empath, or you seem like a medium, or something. And I think I can buy into some of that. I never really foster any of it, because I don't know. It's interesting when you're, for me anyways, in my experience, being a researcher and being a writer, I want to be as unbiased as possible. And I honestly dislike having experiences, because, you know, I write a UFO story of something that I've seen, and I think it can come off as, oh, he's making it up. He's trying to be like the people he's interviewing or whatever. But things do happen to me, and I have shared them through my works throughout the years. But I honestly dislike it when something happens. And I've had a couple of cryptid encounters that have freaked me the hell out. And I was like, I don't like that this happened, but I have to write it down and I have to tell somebody else, you know. So it's something I begrudgingly accept, that experiences keep happening to me. But at the same time, I'm also looking for them. I'm always looking up. I ride my bike constantly during the good weather, and we have a national park in my area, and I'll go ride my bike there during the summer. And I was on it's 45 miles of trails, and I was in a remote area, and I heard a whooping sound. Like, it was crazy, man. So I had stopped my bike. I just finished going up like a 2-mile incline, and I was tired, so I stopped at the top, and I was chilling, and I was drinking some water, and it felt like somebody walked up behind me. Like, you get that feeling, that somebody's behind you. And then I heard a whooping sound, just a quick whoop. And I immediately turned around. There was nothing there. And it felt like some sort of Sasquatch species of some sort, either a spirit of one because he wasn't there, or it threw its voice or something. I don't know, but it was crazy. And I was like, oh no, I had this encounter. I don't want to have this encounter. So I contacted a local Bigfoot researcher and at least told them my encounter. I'm like, here's what happened, here's where it happened, and you can add it to your research or whatever. But yeah, I guess that's how I kind of feel about it.
Interesting. Cryptid encounters, and it's not often people that look for it that have these experiences. It's often people that do not look for it. I've talked to an old lady, told it before in the show. Man, she's in her late 70s, I think, and she contacted me and my back then partner, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and she said, I have this crazy stuff going on in my apartment, and she told us the craziest stories of somebody's under her bed and bumping the bed, and she's wiggling around in her bed and getting visited by entities every night. Like, it's like at a train station, people walking through her apartment all the time, and all kinds of people, but they never talk, and they looking at her, watching at her. Even she even saw ghosts taking pictures of her, and pulling a gun on her and stuff like that. So she had really crazy encounters, and somebody said, man, maybe she's a medium, and she said, I don't give a shit if I'm a medium. I want to be left alone. Right. She was really she was crying and everything. She really wanted it to stop, man. It's
yeah. I spoke with a witness. This was a few years ago now, but she was telling me all of her stories, and she was allowing me to share a couple in one of my books. And at the end of our conversation, this was like after like 4 hours, and we were at a restaurant that her friend owned, so we were just kind of chilling in this back table, drinking coffee and stuff. And at the end of it, she was basically crying her tears. She was really welled up with tears, and she's like, "I just want to know why me." And of course, I don't have that answer. And I told her, I was like, "I don't know, but you sharing your story, I'm going to get it out there. And somebody else who's asking the same question that you are, but is afraid to come forward, might read your story and maybe not feel so alone." And that's pretty cool in my book, you know. So at the very least, that might happen. And I don't think that was the answer she wanted, but she thought it was sweet, you know. And I think, you know, she was accepting of that. But yeah, it's a lot of people come to me and think I have answers, and I rarely do. I typically have more questions than answers, you know.
Yeah, gotcha. But
Yeah,
let's talk about your book now.
sure.
UFOs over Maine, 10th anniversary edition. So, what was the reason you wrote this book? So is you have a lot of UFO encounters in Maine, so many reports.
Yeah.
You decided to write a book about it?
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I told you kind of like my catalyst, my origin story,
Mhm.
and that continued to snowball into my teenage years and into my 20s, where I was collecting stories. And at the same time, after high school, unfortunately, I turned into like this voracious reader. I, I didn't really care too much in high school, but afterwards, I was like consuming as much as I could. And a lot of it was paranormal books, UFO books. And UFO books at the time, and sometimes still now, are written like textbooks. You know, they're just a slog and boring to get through, you know. And I was always looking for that little nugget of information, like the core of the story, which is the person's experience, and not all this pontification on what this supposed expert thinks it might be, or whatever the hell. I just wanted the experiencer story, you know what I mean? And um so when I was in my early 20s, I have this folder, or I had at the time, this big folder of stories that I collected. And some of them were newspaper cutouts, you know, local stuff. Some were things that I wrote myself that people had told me. And I was looking at my bookshelf of all of my paranormal books. And you know, I don't know if any of you are book collectors, but I have a shelf, and I'm always rearranging how my books look, you know, or how I want them to be. And in this particular time, I had all of my main books on one shelf, but I had other UFO books and Bigfoot books and ghost story books on other shelves. But I wanted all the local stuff on one shelf for whatever reason at this time. And I'm looking at it, and there was no book dedicated to UFO stories in Maine. There were some books, some local books that mentioned a UFO story here or there that had occurred in Maine, but there was no book solely dedicated to the UFO phenomenon in Maine. And for some reason, I was dumb enough to think I could take that on, and I was going to write that book. So I started kind of collecting all my stories, and this turns into like an 8 year thing. And at the end of that 8 years, I'm in my 30s now. It's 2014, and or it's, I'm sorry, it's like 2012, and I have the skeleton of a manuscript. And I'm like, well, now like, who's going to put this out? You know, like, I've got this thing, you know, what the hell do I do with it? And I've been a musician for all these years, and I was doing very DIY stuff, and making and distributing my own music and things like that. And I was like, oh, maybe I could do it that way, but, you know, do it with a book as opposed to music. And that is a different beast than trying to do your own music. It wasn't as easy to burn a CD, you know, to write a book as it is to burn a CD, you know, or to like manufacture a book. So I went back to looking at that shelf and all my main books. And I was like, well, there's all the publishers right there. Every one of them who had put out a Maine paranormal book, they might be interested in a UFO book about Maine, you know, Maine stories. So I started sending my manuscript to all of these publishers. And, you know, you got to go to each publisher's site and look up what their rules are for submitting a manuscript. It was a pain in the ass, but I was able to submit like 14 or 15, you know, to 14 or 15 different publishers. And over the course of like 2 years, I was hearing back from them, and they were all no's. I would either not hear back or they said no. And it was very disheartening, you know. And so I was like, okay, well, it's been almost 2 years. Maybe this is something I need to put out myself. I need to start looking down the DIY route. And there was a thing called Create Space. And that was a company that was owned by Amazon. It has since turned into Kindle and KDP Publishing, but at the time it was known as Create Space. And they did print books and ebooks. And you upload your manuscript and you make it look pretty in their software, and you can make a cover and all that stuff. And you can order what's called a proof copy and see what it looks like printed. So I did all of that, and I ordered the proof copy. And one day I was at work, and my roommate texted me and said, "Hey, your proof copy came in." And I was super excited. So I went home at lunch, and as I parked, I got an email. And I look at the email, it's from a company called Schiffer Publishing. And they said, "Hey, we're interested in putting out your book, UFOs Over Maine." And I was like, what? It was literally the day that I got the proof book for the DIY version. So I was like, I got to go look at this book. So I go look at it, and it was cool. It was tangible. I could hold it in my hand, and I'm flipping through it, and, you know, and it looks awful because I formatted it terribly, but it was still cool to look at it, you know, and to have it in my hands. And I'm holding that in one hand, and I got the cell phone in the other. And I'm like, okay, do I do DIY or do I go through traditional publishing? And I was like, I want that experience of going through traditional publishing. So I decided to sign a contract with this company called Schiffer Publishing. And they're out of shit. I think they're out of Pennsylvania, but it might be Minneapolis. I might be confusing a couple of them. But anyway, they weren't local, but they specialized in releasing regional books. So they would release Maine books in New England, and they would release, you know, for like Daniel here, like in Wisconsin, they would have a Wisconsin line of books, you know. So I decided to sign a contract. It was really thick, and I read it and understood half of it and just signed it. I'm like, sweet, this means you'll put my book out, right? And they're like, yeah. So I'm like, okay. So I signed it, and it was a terrible deal. And little did I know that's basically all the book deals, unless you're a, you know, a Dean Koontz or a Stephen King or Danielle Steele or something like that. It's just always a shitty deal. So I didn't know that at the time, but it's awful money wise. But it was really cool to go through having an editor and having a publicist and having a publisher and having deadlines and seeing how to construct a book. Like they gave me all of that experience. It was like on the job training that they just didn't pay you very well for, but it was valuable information. And it took about a year and a half, but that whole process finally was finished, and we had a release date of May 2014, and that's when the first book came out, UFOs Over Maine. So now we fast forward about 8 years, and it's 2022, and I'm sitting in a completely different town. I'm still in the same state, and I have a different bookshelf in front of me, and some of them are my books. And I had just finished writing a horror fiction book, which I'd never done before publicly. My writing started as a youngster with horror fiction. That's what I've written my whole life, but I'd only published nonfiction work. So I was like, I'm going to do this, you know, like, so I put out this horror fiction book. It did terrible. I love the little book though. It's an amazing little book. It's like 32 little short horror stories, and I love it to death, but it sold terribly. And I'm like, okay, so this year sucks money wise. Do next for my next project. And I saw UFOs Over Maine, and I was like, holy shit, that came out in 2014. 2 years from now will be the 10-year anniversary. Let me read it. So I pulled it out and I read it, and it was cringe city. I mean, you look at anything you did 8, 10 years ago, and you're probably like, ooh, you know. So I was like, oh God, this is awful. I've got to do this book justice. This is what got me into writing. I need to write the quintessential book about UFOs in Maine, and there's no traditional publication that tells me how long it can be or what to change or how the cover is going to look. This is going to be my book, and it's going to be a tome, because I'm aware of like 3,000 stories from my state, and there's probably 1,000 that deserve to be told. And out of that 1,000, I know there's a tome there that can be released to the public, that is interesting enough to be released. So I completely dismantled that book. I looked at the original manuscript and I figuratively deleted it, meaning, I kept it, but I just opened a new Word document and started from scratch. I had all of the original stories. So every story that's in UFOs over Maine 2014 is in 2024, but they're expanded. I re-interviewed people and completely rewrote everything. Then I added about 150 more stories. And it includes, abductions, UFO landings, creatures, aliens, lots of crazy stuff, werewolves. And it turned into 440 pages of really incredible tales from my home state. And I literally finished it, I think January 2024 was like the last annoying little change that I had to make inside of it. And then I needed to do a fundraiser to try to raise money, because it's super expensive to try to print books these days, just like everything is expensive. So I did a fundraiser, and it was kind of successful, but I was able to raise enough money to have some copies printed, and now the book is out. And I'm in love with the cover, because I was able to do exactly what I wanted. And I had two different people who I really respect their opinions. One of them being my father. He's a former educator. And the other one is a writer in their own right. And they've released a bunch of books. And so they both proofread it and edited it. And then, I did my edits, and it is what it is now. And I'm super proud of it. Very happy that it came out.
Yeah, man. Quite a story. Dustin.
It's awesome. Yeah, and I was gonna mention is there any towns that like stand out more than the others? Like, do they have like UFO parades? Because here in Wisconsin, there's 3 towns that claim to be the UFO capital of the world.
Okay.
And they actually have yearly UFO parades, and they dress up their cars like flying saucers, and they dress up like aliens, kind of like a modern day cargo cult. That's how I like to coin the word there, because the fact that these 3 towns have so much shit happening over their towns that they celebrate it yearly. So I was wondering if any place in Maine have any of those UFO days?
Unfortunately, no. But there's a couple of towns where that could happen, but they're not happening there, which is fine. But just south of me, New Hampshire, there's one that happens every year. It's the Exeter UFO Festival, and it's an encounter happened in Exeter, New Hampshire, in I think it was 1965, and police were involved, which was really cool. So that's turned into a festival every year. But yeah, there are some towns that do stick out, but it's really like the state is rampant with sightings. All you got to do is look up, and somebody's going to see something weird on any given night. You know what I'm saying?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You should start one.
I've thought about things like that before, but I have resigned myself to not being an event organizer of any kind. I know a lot of them, and I've been involved in other people's events, and I've gone to them and participated and helped slightly. And I'm like, that's not the thing for me to do.
Sure.
It's a whole lot without a whole lot of reward. And I know it might sound like I'm focusing on money or getting paid, but like, this is what I do for a living. And I think it's fair to be able to have a place to live and to eat, and, so this is what I've been doing for like the full time for the last 5 years. And, there's good years and bad years. And I'm hoping this year is one of the good ones, with this release.
Yeah. So tell us about a few cases, man. Sounds so interesting. Tell us about few spectacular cases from Maine.
Well, that lady that I had mentioned earlier, who like had the tears in her eyes, one of her stories really stuck with me, and I think you'll see why by the end of it, because it's kind of an unassuming story, and then it hits you at the end. So this was in the like mid 90s, and she was married at the time, and her kids were teenagers, 14 and 15, I think, or 14 and 16, something like that. And it was just before 9 p.m. and mom and dad were going upstairs to watch a movie in bed. And the kids were going to stay downstairs and watch a movie in the living room. I guess it was coming on TV at 9 o'clock. So mom's upstairs, she's brushing her teeth, and her husband says, what's that light out there? So she kind of, toothbrush in her mouth, like pokes her head out of the bathroom. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, there's this weird light outside. She's like, you're just looking at the moon. I think it's a full moon. And he's like, no, the moon's over there. This light's over here. She's like, well, let me see. So she goes out and looks out the window, and she's like, yeah, that's a weird light. And it looked like the moon. It almost looked like a second moon, although it didn't have like any definition that the moon actually has. So she's like, you want to go outside and look at it? And he was like, yeah. So they go downstairs, and the kids see that mom and dad are going outside. And they're like, what the hell are you doing? Like, oh, there's this weird light outside. You want to come out and see it with us? And they're like, yeah, sure. So they open the door, and where their front porch was, to see the light, they had to all move to the right of the porch and look down the side of the house. So they're all kind of leaning over and looking at this light, and it's real high in the sky, almost moon height to them and almost moon size to them. And they're watching it, and just after a moment, it moves directly in front of the house, and it's much lower, and it's down in their atmosphere. It's like it's over the trees. It's so close. And they're all just staring at it, and no one's saying a word. And then it blinks out, and they're like, wow, that was crazy. They're all talking amongst each other. I can't believe we just saw that. That's nuts. Well, let's go inside and watch the movie, blah, blah, blah. So the kids walk in first, and they look at the TV screen, and they're like, hey, the movie's done. And they can see the credits of the movie going up. And she's like, no, that's the movie that was previously on. And then your movie's going to come on. They're like, no, it's after 9 now. Like that should be the start of the movie, not the end of a movie. And so she's like, hold on. So she goes into the kitchen, and there's a little clock on the oven, and she looks at that. And it's 11 p.m., just after 11 p.m. So the entire family lost 2 hours of time. They all knew this. They all recognized it, but they didn't talk about it. They were scared to talk about it, and she hadn't talked about it in quite a while, except for meeting with me. I think the last time she talked about it might have been in 2000, which is crazy. And she's had some other things happen in her life, but that was one of her first encounters, and it was pretty creepy. Like something happened to her entire family, and she's not sure what.
Man,
Wow.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting.
That's crazy.
You have a book on abduction cases. Are they also related to Maine?
Yeah. So there's a really famous encounter, I guess, famous, somewhat in the US. You guys might be familiar with Fire in the Sky, which is the Travis Walton case that happened in Arizona. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a similar case that happened around the same time up in Maine. And it was 4 friends. 2 of them are twin brothers, and the other 2 are friends. And they were all going to college in Massachusetts. It was an art school in Massachusetts. And during their spring break, they wanted to come up to Maine to enjoy the wilderness. So they went up to the Allagash Wilderness Waterway in 1976. And they drove like all through the night. And they got to Maine in Millinocket, which is a remote area of Maine. And there's our largest mountain is located in that town. And they wanted to climb parts of that mountain and fish in the surrounding lakes. So they were here for a course of, I believe it was 10 days, and 4 days into their time here is when they had a really strange encounter. But there were all these other people, and they were kind of lakeside, and there were various barbecues going on, and there were families, and there were people swimming, and this light in the sky just kind of appeared over the lake, and everybody kind of stopped what they were doing and looked at it. And some of them made like, oh, we're going to see little green men jokes, and then it kind of blinked out, almost like similar to the other lady's story. It just kind of blinked out. It didn't like fly away or maneuver oddly. It was just this light appeared and then it disappeared. So they thought that was strange. A couple nights later, the guys were running low on protein, meaning they had eaten like all of their fish that they have caught so far. And all they really had was snacks. And they knew if they were going to continue to hike and do all that stuff, that they needed more fish. And so they went out fishing one morning and they had no luck. And then they decided to go out in the late afternoon, continued to have no luck. And now they're out of fish. So they're like, guys, let's try some night fishing. Maybe there's too many people around. Let's go out at night. And they all agreed. So they built this big bonfire on the shore so they could find their way back in the darkness because there's no lights. They're in the remote wilderness in Maine. So they built this big bonfire. They said it was large, and some of the logs that they found were, 3 and 4 inches around, and it was quite large. And when they left, they were actually kind of concerned that it was too large. Like, should we be leaving this, But they had built it in a very neutral area closer to the water. So they knew that nothing was going to catch on fire, and they were the only ones camping in this little inlet. So they're like, it'll be fine. Plus, it'll help us. So they're out, they go fishing, and they see that light again. It appears in the sky, and they're like, whoa, shit, look at that. And then the next thing they know, they're back on shore. 3 of them are standing on shore. The light is above them. One of them sitting in the canoe that's pulled up on shore, and their bonfire is just embers, and they all feel really weird. And the light sends down a beam of light onto the lake. And then it kind of sucks that beam back up, and then it takes off into the air. It becomes, star size, and they lose it. So they all go sit down at a picnic table. They're like, what happened? Did we get any fish? No fish. They don't know what happened. So now they're like 6 or 7 days into their trip, and they still have 3 or 4 more days. And they went through the motions, but they weren't really gung-ho anymore. They were lethargic. They didn't seem to care. They just had to bide their time until it was time to go back to school. So they did that. They go back to school. They start living their lives. They get married. They're out of school. They get jobs in different areas, but they're still like in New England, close in New England. And it wasn't until, like the early 80s when one of the guys started having strange medical ailments. He would have unexpected seizures. He would wake up in the middle of the night and he would just be drenched with sweat. And he would recall having these dreams being surrounded by creatures, and he was like laying down on something. And he wasn't sure what he was laying down on, but there were creatures looking down at him. It was freaking him out. And he decided to talk to his brother about it. And this is the person that the brother is the twin brother that went on the trip with him. And he was like, are you having trouble sleeping? And as soon as the brother asked that, the other brother was like, oh my God, I'm so glad you said something. Yes. And like, there's these creatures. It's so weird. I don't know what's going on. So in doing some research, the brother who was having the seizures and the dreams, he found MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. And he found that there was a conference was happening fairly close to where he lived, and he wanted to go there and speak to a researcher. He was given the name of Raymond Fowler, who is a prolific, still alive, prolific UFO researcher and writer in the New England area. He actually lives in southern Maine, which is pretty cool. And I think he's 86 years old right now, and he just put out a new book, which is really, really cool. But so this is the mid to late 80s, and the brother finds Ray Fowler at this conference. And he goes up to Ray and he's having a conversation with him and trying to tell him about him being abducted and all this stuff, or like something weird happened in Maine. I don't think he was using the word abducted yet, but he's like, there's this weird light in the sky. And Ray was kind of paying attention, but he's heard all these stories 1,000 times, and he's at a conference and he's trying to sign books. And then the guy says, I have a twin brother that this also happened to at the same time. And that got Ray's attention. He's heard stories where aliens, extraterrestrials, for some reason, seem to be interested in twin siblings for whatever reason. So Ray decided to stop what he was doing, and he took the dude aside and got all of his information and got the names of the other men that were there. And then this started years long interviews. Ray did a bunch of background checks on these guys, even speaking with their employers to see what kind of men they were. Spoke to friends and family, and then he had all 4 men go under hypnosis regression therapy. And through these hypnosis sessions, the full scope of their story came to the surface. And when they were out, they set the bonfire and they were out, they saw that light in the sky, and the light put some sort of beam on the lake, and almost like it was searching for them, and like it was coming for their canoe. And they were freaked out, and they were just trying to canoe faster to get away from it. And they were all seeing that it was going to be impossible to get away from this beam of light. And then they recall going through this weird tube thing of light, and it was like their bodies were being ripped apart almost to the molecule, like they were being transferred or transported into something else. So they all make it into this other thing, and they're in this room, and it's really bright and white. And there are these creatures that are dressed in skin tight, shiny, metallic, shiny suits. I think they're bluish greenish, and they can't remember their faces. All of them can't remember their faces for like their first couple of hypnosis sessions. And then the hypnotist starts to be able to break through with some of the guys, and they start describing the big head and the big black eyes. And there was a lot of there wasn't a lot of telepathy, but there was some, but it was mostly like trying to calm them down because they were all freaking out about what was happening during the examination process. And the men even remember like contraptions being placed over their genitals and being milked, for lack of a better term. And even though like it was a pleasurable feeling, they all felt a sense of assault, from it. It wasn't a pleasant thing at all. And they felt like victims, and it was awful. And then there was blood and hair and fingernails, and all this stuff was taken from them. And they kept saying, we're doing this to help you. We're doing this, to make sure the human species is going to be okay, blah, blah, blah. And I'm telling a very, very short story of this really expansive, abduction thing that came out during the hypnosis process. But all the excruciating detail is in the book, and it's all for hypnosis sessions and the story surrounding it. And I was able to take transcripts of what they were actually saying during the hypnosis process, and it's just a fascinating and really sad story. And come 35 years later from their encounter, one of the men, something snapped in him, and he started behaving erratically. They would be at conferences. They would, they're always invited to conferences in New England, to talk about their abduction. And one of the men just started like behaving angrily and almost like he was bipolar in some way, although that's my words, not anybody else's. And so the men, the other 3 guys, started distancing themselves from him because they didn't like the way he was behaving. And when they started distancing themselves, that's when he started to go on the record and say, none of this happened. We made it up for money and blah, blah, blah. And the other 3 guys are like, what? Like, no, we haven't made any money from any of this. And this has been a terrible experience. And we're sharing our story to help other people that have been through it. But to this day, there's this infighting between the 4 of them. Really, it's one guy and the 3 others, and it's too bad. It's too bad. I saw them once at a conference, and I doubt they would remember meeting me, but they were lovely gentlemen to see and listen to speak, but it's a wild story, but it's one of the big ones from Maine,
Wow. Was this like near a lake, or was this by the ocean when these guys were?
It was lake, not ocean.
Okay.
But
okay.
I do.
I know
have some
Maine's right by
stories.
the ocean there.
Yeah, yeah. I do have some
Mhm.
ocean stories too. But yeah.
Yeah.
This was all lake stuff.
Okay. Yeah, because there's tons of stories of them popping out of the ocean and
Yeah.
even lakes too. Because even
Yeah.
I live right by Lake Michigan here, so
Yeah,
it's one of the
Lake
largest
Michigan's
lakes
got
in the
some.
world.
Yeah, it's got some crazy. They have a crazy story that happened in the mid '90s. With
Yeah.
all these people, seeing these crazy UFOs. And there was this couple that was at the shores of one of the lakes in Michigan there, and they saw like a waterfall in the sky,
Oh
and
shit.
it turned out that it was a UFO that had left the water, and there was so much water on it that it was raining off of it.
Yes.
And they kind of
okay.
followed this wall of water up, looking at it, and they're like, "Oh, it's a friggin' UFO. This is crazy." And I ended up finding a similar story to that here in Maine. And it turned out it was a dude I went to high school with. And he was, some of areas of Maine are very affluent. And I've always lived in the peripheral of those because my family and I are not affluent, but we're in an area that is known to be. And this buddy that I had in high school, he was in high school at the time, and he's eating on the balcony of his house. If that kind of tells you anything, like balconies around here, that means you got some money. And they also live like close to the water. Again, you got to have money in Maine to like live on the water, especially, and it was the ocean, so he's eating breakfast out there one summer morning, and he hears a splash of water. He's like, what the hell is that? So he looks at the marina in front of him, and he's not seeing anything in the water, but he sees like this waterfall going up into the sky, and he's like, what the hell? And when he gets to the top of whatever this is, he sees a silver sphere hovering above the marina, and he's like, what the? And then boom, it just takes off, at the speed of light. And it continues to rain down until it's all gone. And he was like, it was the wildest thing I've ever seen in my life, And so I scoured the papers, and it turns out a couple of other people had seen it as well and called the police about it. So there was a little blotter about it in the police beat section of like the local paper. So I was able to cut that out and kind of add that to the story, which is kind of cool.
I'm like truly terrified now after hearing that story about the two twin brothers, because I'm an identical twin, and my sister
Wow.
and I experienced that UFO thing together at the same
Oh,
time when we were
wow.
younger children. And I mean, I'm in the paranormal is what I do for a living. I'm a psychic medium, tarot reader, all that stuff. So I think a lot of people could probably say she's not really all there mentally most of the
Right.
time for doing this,
Which is awful,
but my
but
sister, yeah, but my sister and I, we suffer from horrible PTSD, anxiety problems, mental stuff, a lot of depression in our family. And it's just like, when you say that, it makes me wonder. I wonder if identical twins are like, I wonder how many identical twins have actually experienced things, because I know her and I have experienced the same dreams, but it's like, what's the differentiate? Oh, we had a dream instead of a UFO, but it's like how they explained the way that the aliens looked to them is exactly how they looked to me. They had this very metal look to them, like that silver blue color.
yeah.
Their eyes were just like almost like a square black, and they were really big. It was just really interesting to hear that. So now I'm just like, man, I wonder if they got like a GPS tracking on me now, and they're gonna come back in like 10
Right.
years and be like, hey, it's time for your checkup. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
dang it, like what is going on?
And and it is funny to laugh at and make light of, but yeah, maybe.
It's true though, because it's just
Yeah,
like I'm a
it's
twin,
possible.
and it happened to both of us.
Right.
We could say the story word for word away from each other. It's not
Right.
scripted. Like, who wants to truly admit they saw aliens? That's going to make you sound crazy. Like, nobody wants
Right.
to be seen that way. So I really do feel like that when people come out with those stories, it's like it's
Yeah.
serious. It
It's
really is.
it rarely helps to boost them, professionally or personally, or very
Mm-mm.
rarely is money made. Even Travis Walton, even though he's had a great career like speaking at conventions, that's not a way to, you're not thinking in your early 20s like, I'm going to make a living speaking at UFO conventions. Like, you don't think that's can be a thing. It just happened to turn into a thing that Travis could do quite a bit. But even
Right.
so, it's not like he's speaking at a convention every week. That
No.
like that's not where he's making
Yeah.
his yearly income. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
supplemental, if anything. But anyways, it's typically not helpful to admit this stuff, and people in the Navy have been experiencing that for years, or in the military in general. And finally there's some sort of things that are kind of coming out to help them with that, although I'm not very
Yeah, that's a good
optimistic.
point. Yeah, that's a good point. I was about to ask you what you think about all the stuff that's happening right now.
Yeah,
Or
well,
whatever you had.
yeah, I think it's fascinating, and it's amazing for someone like me, and I'm sure like you guys, to be able to read UFO or paranormal stories in the mainstream, and people are taking it seriously. Like, that's really cool. But at the same
Yes.
time, there's a lot of it that's tough to trust. And the latest Arrow report that literally just came out this month, I think just a couple of days ago, they're like, no aliens. We found
Yeah.
nothing.
They said that last time.
Yeah. And
they're gonna keep going with that story, but they're gonna drip just slowly. Drips of other things gonna be coming.
Right.
The whistleblowers are the keys.
The planes.
To
the planes. They started the whole plane thing. I'm like,
Right.
you guys don't think the planes were falling apart before? They're doing it so we can look somewhere else,
Right.
It's true.
So that's sad, because I thought there was some promise. There was this amazing article that happened in the New York Times in 2017, and that kind of broke everything wide open. And then Tom DeLonge and all his crazy shit with To the Stars, and all of that was kind of breaking everything out into the open. And there was a lot of disclosure people that were like super happy this progress was happening. And for the record, I'm not a disclosure person. It'd be great if it happened, but I want to talk to experiencers and share their stories. But it's cool that all of this stuff was coming out, and it seemed like the government was starting to take it seriously. But after this latest report, it just, I'm losing optimism on it. Also, the hearing that was, I guess, at the tail end of last year with David Grush and Brian Graves and these guys, 3 of them were there. And Grush said some amazing things, but the amazing things he said, there's zero evidence. And he keeps saying to this day that he's under a lock and key, unable to tell his sources or to provide any evidence, even though he says there's evidence. And so that's kind of turned me sour to him, which sucks, because he said some amazing stuff. But I'm sorry, to have these amazing stories and to be so public, to be able to speak in front of the government, you got to have something with it. You know what I mean? And then the Miami Mall aliens thing happened, and that was like super fascinating. 8-foot tall aliens? Oh shit! Well, everybody and their mother has a cell phone. Awesome. Let's see this footage. Oh, there's no footage. Okay. So these cool things seem to kind of keep happening, but there's not a lot to grab onto and to hold all this optimism with. So even though that stuff is cool and I like to listen to it and try to keep my finger on the pulse of it, I also kind of just prefer to speak to experiencers and share their stories, but that's where I'm kind of at with the current state of affairs. That's helpful.
It reminded me a lot of the Bob Lazar thing. I mean, it's different because we have very important people now, but the Bob Lazar thing, he said a lot of crazy stuff. Yeah. But it's still, to this day, it's a story that you can believe or you cannot believe it.
Right.
Same with David Grush. Everybody's freaking out, but I say there's no proof, man. He said a lot of crazy things, and maybe they're true, maybe they're not. So I can believe or I cannot believe it.
Yeah.
And until now, there's nothing really that backs up his story. So,
and it sucks because he's very well spoken. He had significant positions within the military. Like there's no denying that. With Lazar, you couldn't even verify that stuff. At least with Grush, you can, and that's like really great. Yeah. And so I still do have an inkling of hope that he'll be able to, at least have some sources come forward, because a lot of his stories were third hand, like somebody told him that somebody experienced something, or somebody told him that there were bodies or that deaths have been caused by these things. And so I'm still holding out hope that an NDA expires or something, and he can come forward with some really startling information.
And I know Stephen Greer came out with some guys, other whistleblowers from the military, who claim to seen some other reverse engineer.
Right.
Oh, now Dustin is gone. Yeah, he will come back. But yeah, on the other hand, Bob Lazar's story has some nice, interesting aspects to it, especially when it describes going into this UFO and describes the things he saw.
Yeah,
it's interesting though. So
absolutely,
I'm not sure. A few years ago, I tend to not believe him, to be honest. But after the whole Grush thing, I heard a lot that was similar to ours.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what also is similar is the lack of evidence. And that's kind of crazy because I'm also not one that needs all this evidence to believe things, But I don't know. I'm also not making these public claims right in front of the government either. You know what I mean? Like there is a difference. You know what I mean? And so I think with an extraordinary claim, and you're trying to garner public backing to what you're saying, I think you got to provide a little bit of something. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But and I'm not unreasonable either. You know, it's not like I'm looking for a UFO to land at the White House or whatever the hell. It's, you know, something reasonable, some paperwork. I'm cool. You know what I mean? I'm easy to sway.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Man, Luna, what is your take on, because Nomar talked about these abduction stories. What's your take on abductions?
What do you mean? Like just in general for the show, just taking up
I'm
or
interested if you're a few years ago, abduction stories, I was like, no, man, this is too crazy. But then I heard tons of stories about abductions, and I started to collect these stories, and I had the chance to talk to Calvin Parker from
Oh,
the
cool.
Pascagoula case, and he was so cool, and it sounded so honest and everything, and I
Yeah.
was like, maybe I should rethink that whole abduction
And,
thing.
and
Maybe
rest in peace to Calvin.
yeah, right. Yeah, he died unfortunately. So do you believe in all these abduction stories, or what?
I mean, I had an alien come into my house, you know, so it's like for me to say like an alien coming into my house and people being abducted, what's the difference between the two? You know, they both sound just as, you know,
Right.
crazy as the next. But for me, yes, I do believe, you know, because I do spiritual work every day. I talk to my spirit guides and things out there that we can't see. And I know this is just from my perspective. I don't have proof of that. I can't show you, can't make you hear what I'm
Right.
saying. And I understand that. But there is extraterrestrial. There is something, you know, there are different levels to different energies in the other realms, and it is tough to reach extraterrestrial level from a human standpoint. Their energy far surpasses past loved ones. This might get people angry, God, children, animals. It is so it's even hard. You would have to raise your vibration so high. So yes, I do believe that they exist. I've never spoken to one from the other side before, but yeah, but I think we also should have to take it with a grain of salt, because the internet exists. We have Adobe, we have like, you know, all this
Right.
stuff, and people, even in the paranormal and within UFOs and everything, people do it because they know if the story is crazy enough, they're going to get paid if they get enough views. So I think we should take everything with a grain of salt, but 100%, I do believe that there are people out there that truly did experience something completely horrific, and it is going to stick with them to this day. But I think that we have to kind of go with what Nomar was saying, like the evidence, is it matching up? You know, like I think it just really comes down to the person. But for me, yes, 100% they exist.
Yeah. And you know,
100%.
and I agree with Luna as well. And to kind of piggyback off of it, like even though I do have some of my own personal opinions on who I believe and what I think would help relieve some of my apprehensions on someone like Grush or whatever, like those are besides the point when I speak to an experiencer. It's like speaking to a victim or a victim of assault, and I believe victims, you know what I'm saying? And it's not up for me to judge them or to decide what happened to them. All I can do is intake it and say, if you're cool with it, I'm going to share it. So hopefully others can do something with that information, hopefully relate, hopefully not feel so alone. But if all I can do is give a non-judgmental ear, then I've done my job, and hopefully they feel better by getting this off their chest. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
At the very least, I believe that they believe it, you know, and out of all of those, there's probably 15-20% of them that I believe it actually happened, you know. And I've seen some strange things myself, and so I am a believer in the extraterrestrial phenomena. I am a believer in Sasquatch and ghosts. I don't claim to know what they are, but to have millions of witnesses throughout decades, throughout centuries, there's got to be something to it. You know what I mean? Like in a court of law with millions of witnesses, I mean that's going to be, you know, a guilty verdict or whatever the hell is the person's going to get off with, you know, whatever that means to have all those witnesses. You know, something's got to be to it. I just don't know what it is.
I mean, thousands and billions of years ago, you know, there's depictions in all different cultures stating these things. What was there wasn't internet back then. They didn't have to try to be famous. It wasn't about money for them. There's a reason why hieroglyphics have them, you know, everything. If you look in history, you'll see the depictions of different creatures
and
and
cultures that are
extraterrestrial.
cultures that are thousands of miles apart have
Yeah.
similar depictions. It's really interesting.
It's like, even if you get into how the freaking pyramids were built,
Yeah.
you
Interesting
know,
stuff.
even all that stuff too. So it's just like, they didn't have technology. There wasn't trying to get fame. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
been talked about
And
forever.
I love at the same time too, the Egyptians are saying that the gods did help them out. Well, they're sketching this on the wall. It's like, well, we have to listen to that, you know. They are saying some truth there.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
how big
yeah.
are these pyramids? I mean, think about it for a
Yeah,
second.
Jesus Christ.
You know, I mean, just they're massive, and how big these blocks are that they're making these people push, and it's insane. It's absolutely insane to think about.
It really
would help.
is. And also, for me personally, I want to be careful about not whitewashing history either. You know what I mean? Like, if a person of color didn't do it, then, or couldn't do it, then it's aliens. Like, you know, I don't want to think that way as well. But to look at some of the stuff that's happened in the past, you know, as far as like information goes, you know, did the Egyptians built it? Yeah, probably. But was some of this information coming from somewhere? You know, like, you know, I don't know. And it's interesting to think about. And what really gets me is what we were just talking about, the cultures being thousands of miles apart, you know, from China to the Egyptians to Native Americans, and having similar beliefs in something just called something different, you know, and they're all these miles apart. That's super interesting to me, and hard to wrap my head around, frankly, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're just ancient cargo cults.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Man, my point a few minutes ago was just that some of these stories, and especially these abduction stories or visitations by aliens, they sound so bizarre, so strange. It's so hard to believe, but on the other hand, why not? We don't know what they're up to. And I remember the story about, I think his name is Peter Curry from Australia.
Oh yeah, I love that story.
I chatted with him on Facebook a little bit, and I think actually my buddy Brenton Thomas interviewed him. There is this book about how he got visited by these two female aliens, and yeah, they wanted to.
Can we tell the story?
They wanted
I love
to
the story.
mate with him. Yeah, tell the story.
So yeah, no, he was sleeping. It was early in the morning, and he felt like a cat jumped onto his bed. He doesn't even own a cat. He kind of wakes up and he sees this woman straddling him, like good figure, beautiful, well-rounded, but different facial. I mean, still human, but very kind of differently. And he sees another woman sitting on the side too, and he's just like, what the hell is going on? This woman's riding my cock. And he starts to worry, and this extraterrestrial cups his back of his head and pours him towards her breast. And he's just in panic mode. And he just bites down on her, and he bit like some skin off of her, and it went down his throat and like burned his throat. And he starts coughing, and he starts making a scene, and he hears in his head that these extraterrestrials were communicating to themselves, like, he's doing this wrong, something went wrong, and then they just like disappeared. And when he woke up, he had a boner for 6 hours. That was agonizing. And he found out there was like these, if you like push your finger into your skin, you get that indent. There's like it was a hair that was wrapped around his penis that kept his dick hard, apparently. So he was ripping this thing off his dick, and he's like, he finally gets it off, and he gets relief, and he's like, what the fuck, you know, like, what just happened? And he had this hair tested, and it got bizarre results. Like, it had all these like different race of humans, even like some even rare humanoid things, and it was white hair, so it didn't have whatever plant or whatever creature had didn't need much sunlight or some shit. Really bizarre shit. It came back, a huge investigation, and yeah, and he kind of went off after that, kind of just telling his story. And
wow, that was the one time it happened.
Yes, I think that's his only time.
But again, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it makes you wonder too, this breeding process, you know, like the story that you told too, like they were milking these guys. Right.
Yeah, I
don't know.
Wild. That's wild.
There's
another guy, I forget his name, but they did a documentary about him, and I think it's called Love and Aliens. And,
yes, I've seen that.
His first name might be David. I forget, but anyways, it was similar. He was visited by female, or I guess female aliens, and for purposes of breeding. And
and he'd paint them. He would paint portraits of these people.
Yeah, and it's the art is gorgeous. You know,
it is. Yeah, they're pretty. Some of them are pretty obscene
Yeah.
photographs
Oh
of
yeah.
him
Yeah.
fucking these aliens. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
gnarly.
Yeah.
And
Interesting
also,
documentary.
I know. We had a podcast about this guy not too long ago in one of our German podcast projects.
Oh,
I
cool.
don't remember his name, but yeah, he has a lot of. He produced a lot of children, he claims.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He claims that he's in contact with his children and so on and so forth. I think his name was David Huggins. Yeah, that was his name.
Yeah. Nice. Yes. Yes. Yes.
David Huggins was his name. It's an interesting story, man. It's a
It
very
really
quite
is.
interesting story. And even the story of Calvin Parker is very bizarre.
Yes, yes.
How
Yeah.
these robot-like with their crab-like hands
Yeah.
pulled him inside, and they gave him this shot that tranquilized him. And inside there was this nice female-looking humanoid alien with the extra long middle finger, which is very bizarre, and
Yeah.
shoved the middle finger down his throat. What did she do in there? I don't know. But it's so bizarre.
I don't know. It is. It's
bizarre.
very bizarre.
And
you know, their police interview, like afterwards, and where they left the recorder on, you know, when they left the room, like and they were just still like, wow, what was that? And did it end? They don't believe us. And, you know, hearing all that stuff was just amazing. They had no idea there was a recorder going, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And like I said, I've talked.
What genius of the cops to do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, because they wanted to know if they're lying, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
When I talked to Calvin Parker, I had the feeling this guy is the real deal. I really had the feeling. I'm a skeptic. I am a skeptic, but when I heard the story, and I thought, man, this guy is not bullshitting me. It's crazy. It's a crazy story.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's when I'm with a witness and I'm in person, because I'll interview a witness any way they're most comfortable. My preference is in person, though. And so when that can happen, it's amazing because you get to see the look in their eye and hear the tone of their voice and to see their mannerisms. And, you know, even though I'm not an expert in, body language or anything, you do get a sense of somebody and you get a gut feeling like, can I trust this person? And there have been people I talk to, I'm like, oh, they're lying. So and when the story's done, I'm like, thank you so much. And then I never contact them again. I'm still nice, but there are these other people that I'm still in contact with to this day because they just really trust me. They like to share what's happening to them still, but when you're with them in person, it's just so powerful, and you're hard pressed to when you really get a good gut feeling about somebody to like not believe them. It's hard not to sometimes.
Yeah. There's something that I can't wrap my head around. I'm interested in your opinion, and I'm also interested in Luna's opinion on that, because you've talked about UFOs in the shape of a sphere a few minutes ago, and you hear a lot about UFOs that are balls of light and spheres and stuff. Do you guys think that these spheres could be the same as orbs?
I certainly think it's possible. I've been hearing a lot of reports lately, and when I say lately, like the last 5 years, they're kind of like ramping up, and it's orange balls that are getting reported like quite a bit, because there, like, for a while there was a run of like black triangles being reported, and now kind of like the common thing being reported lately is these orange orbs. And it's interesting, and yeah, they could be orbs, they could be spaceships, they could be Chinese lanterns, but they could also be like these balls of plasma. It's really interesting to talk to a witness who has seen one close up, and it's not just a ball of light, or it's not just a metal sphere. It's something organic almost. It almost seems like the thing itself is alive, which is a really interesting description that I hear sometimes.
Did you see
so orbs? Sorry, go ahead, Dustin.
I was going to say that jellyfish UFO that released that recently. Did you see that?
I did, yeah.
This weird pendulums or weird pentacles below it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just reminded me what you just kind of said, the kind of creature type UFO.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. Go ahead, Luna.
No, you're good. No worries. Orbs, where they started, and I believe because I tried to do as much research on the paranormal as possible without speaking out my butt. Delaware's calling me. I don't know what that's all about. But came depiction from the monks as that's what spirit look like.
Oh wow.
So I have personally done myself. I've seen, well, being in paranormal investigation, I believe that there are two different types of paranormal investigators, but we'll just get into the one I am, where we try to debunk everything as just being dust, things like that. So there's the way to move and all that stuff. So orbs are meant to be seen as spirits, how we see spirit. Now, when I had my UFO thing happen with the aliens, there was a bright light outside my window. Well, I know that thing with lights with them, but there's also something with lights with spirits. I lived in a super haunted house. I'll make this really quick, but I was sleeping. I was 15 years old, 16 years old, so almost like 20 some years ago. And I'm sleeping, and my sister, we're twins. We always shared a bedroom. Lucky us. So her bed was next to mine. Probably like when somebody's like a cop or something flashing a flashlight right at your face, but you can't see anything around it because it's bright. You know what I'm talking about, when somebody's shining a light in your face and you can't see what's around it? Well, I woke up to that. It was about this big, and I'm typically one of those people like, what the fuck is that? I'll say something, be like, get out of my face, but it was very strange. It was very bright. It was as bright as a flash, but it didn't hurt my eyes. I didn't have to squint. I wasn't going like this. I was looking at it, and I felt it was almost like talking to me in the sense of, it's okay. Everything's going to be fine. Go back to sleep. It's okay. And that's what I did. I fell asleep, and I woke up like, like one of these things. And I was like, telling my sister, I was like, did you see that bright light last night? And she goes, what are you talking about? And I was like, there was a huge bright, like someone was flashing a flashlight in my face. It was like this big. And he goes, why didn't you say? I don't know. I just got tired. And I went back to sleep. So was that a UFO? Was that a spirit? It was personal stuff. Orbs are very strange. I think orbs can be energy. And that's how they show themselves. It can be spirit, but I think when it comes down to it, electricity, light is energy. And so maybe that's how they show themselves. So, I mean, I'm going to say orbs are real because I experienced something so crazy, but I couldn't even still tell you today what that was. So, yeah, very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, guys, we're almost at the end now. So many more questions, but not enough time. I think we have to meet again, Nomar. That was interesting.
That was awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
Before we wrap it up for today, please let people know where they can find you if you want to be found on the internet, and where they can find your books. We will put your links in the description, of course. And something that you want to promote, please go for it.
Sure. So yeah, my latest book, UFOs over Maine, 10th anniversary edition, that can be found on Amazon, Kindle, and I have copies for sale in my own online store, which is slevikstore.company.site. I know you won't remember, so we'll put the links in the show notes. But you can also do a Google search. My name is so unique, Nomar Slevik, that if you just do a Google search of Nomar Slevik, you'll find all my stuff. If you do a Google search for Nomar Slevik in books, you'll find all my books in various places that they're available. And and that's really it. And I do have a podcast. It's called I Want to Believe, and that's available wherever you get your podcasts. And they are storytelling based podcasts that are stupidly overly produced. So I like to share stories, and there's like a musical bed, and there's sound effects and clips taken from various places, and imported in there. And the latest one just came out yesterday, and it's about BEKs, Black Eyed Kids. It's my 6th episode on Black Eyed Kids, so it's part 666. Just silly, but I just love sharing Black Eyed Kids stories because they terrify me, and it's one of the few things in the paranormal that still terrify me. I think it's that and Dogmen, and some alien stuff is pretty freaky too, but Black Eyed Kids are creepy. I don't know what the hell they are. And I'm going to tell a real quick story. So I may have almost missed BEKs by a few minutes. So I was spending the night at a friend's house, and I left really late, or late for me anyways. It was like 1 a.m. And while I was like driving away, my cell phone goes off. They'd sent me a text message, but I didn't check it until I got home. but they had asked me if I started knocking on their door. Like, did I forget something? And I was like, what? No. They're like, yeah, there was this soft knocking on the door and it was just constant. And I tried to look out the window from upstairs to like down at the porch to see who it was. But I got this real bad feeling and I didn't even want to look to see like who or what it was. So I just went back to bed. They know nothing of Black Eyed Kids, mind you. And in my head, I was like, oh my God, was it the Black Eyed Kids? And were they out there when I walked to my car? Like it was crazy. And so that's just my brief potential interaction with maybe Black Eyed Kids. but yeah, that's the latest episode. I want to believe Black Eyed Kids.
Yeah.
I think that's everything.
Guys, have a look at this podcast. Link in the description. That was awesome. And I did a podcast too about the black-eyed children, and I really do think it's some kind of an urban legend. I don't think there is something to it, but these stories are very strange, man. Very strange.
Until they come knocking, Daniel. Until they come knocking. Keep it up. See what happens.
Not answering the door anymore from now on. Yeah, guys, thank you. I had a lot of fun today, man. It was Luna's first episode as a co-host.
Yay.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, she did a great job, man.
Let me get a picture of us.
Yeah,
cool.
Like
I noticed, Daniel, like half the time my name was your name. I was like, fucking hey. You notice that?
No. Yeah,
when I finally got kicked out that last long time, I changed my name at the last minute there. I'm gonna have to edit that. But anyways, everybody knows who I am anyway.
Yeah, people don't know what we're talking about, but we're at the end anyways. Yeah, like I said, thank you guys. Thank you, Nomar. We will definitely meet again and talk about some more stories.
And you guys are great and really easy to talk to. So thank you for that. It was very cool.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. People, if you like today's episode, please give us a like, hit the subscribe button, leave a nice comment, tell your friends about us.
Yeah.
Okay, no more. Please stay with us for 2 more minutes, okay?
Sure.